I've spent 15 years training for every kind of enemy. I've survived insurgent ambushes in the desert and freezing extraction ops in the dead of night. I thought I knew what danger looked like. I thought I knew what war was. But last week, I faced an enemy that doesn't die. And I didn't meet him on a battlefield. I met him after my heart stopped beating 60 feet below the Atlantic surface. The doctors call it a medical anomaly. My SEAL team calls it a miracle. But I'm sitting here in this dark hospital room, watching the snow start to fall outside, and I'm telling you, it's a debrief. I was clinically dead for 12 minutes. And in those 12 minutes, I didn't see a tunnel of light. I saw a countdown. Jesus didn't just save my soul. He gave me a message for yours. He looked me in the eyes with a voice like crashing waves and said, "Caleb, go back. Tell them that in 7 days, they attack. Before this December ends, the silence is going to break. And most of you aren't ready for the kind of war that's coming." Before I describe the vision of the two armories and exactly what is scheduled to happen when that 7-day clock hits zero, I need you to do something for me. This isn't just a story, it's a mobilization. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I need to know where the watchmen are standing. Hit the like button and subscribe right now, because what I'm about to say might be the only warning you'll ever hear. My name is Caleb Ward. I was a man who trusted in my own strength, my own rifle, and my own gear. I was the unbreakable man. But I learned the hard way that when the real enemy strikes, your physical armor is nothing but rust. This is how it started. This is how I died. And this is what is coming in 7 days. My life was measured in reps, rucks, and results. For 15 years, I had sculpted my body into a machine designed for one purpose: the application of overwhelming force. If you saw me back then, neck thick as a bull's, arms like corded steel, and a jawline set in permanent defiance, you'd see a man who believed he was made of iron. I was a decorated Navy SEAL with 3 combat tours under my belt, a man who had walked through the valley of the shadow of death and told the shadow to get out of my way. I didn't just feel invincible. I had the service record and the scars to prove it. To me, religion was a crutch for the weak, a fairy tale for people who couldn't handle the raw, bloody reality of the world. I looked at the religious types on base with a pitying smirk. While they were praying for peace, I was cleaning my rifle and prepping for the next kinetic op. My gospel was written in ballistic tables and mission orders. I believed that if there was a God, he was far too busy to care about a soldier's heartbeat. And if he did exist, he'd have to answer to me for the things I'd seen. I was my own God, and my temple was the gym. My heart was a muscle, nothing more, strong, steady, and utterly empty of anything resembling faith. At the time, I was stationed at a coastal training facility, tasked with breaking in the new pups, green recruits who thought they knew what pain was. I pushed them until they puked and then pushed them some more, all while maintaining a physique that made me look like a statue carved from granite. It was a Tuesday morning, the air off the Virginia coast tasting like salt and diesel, when we headed out for a routine deep water rebreather drill. It was supposed to be easy. Just another day at the office. We dropped into the Atlantic, the cold Atlantic water, swallowing the sunlight as we descended. I led the way, my movements precise, my breathing rhythmic. At 60 feet down, the pressure is a familiar weight, a physical embrace I had mastered 1,000 times before. I was checking the gauges of a struggling recruit when it happened. It wasn't a mechanical failure. It wasn't an equipment snag. It was something internal, a sudden, violent pop in the center of my chest, followed by a coldness that had nothing to do with the water temperature. My vision began to tunnel, the blue-gray of the ocean turning into a jagged, ink-black void. I tried to signal my dive buddy, but my hands felt like lead weights. For the first time in my life, the machine failed. The iron broke. As the last of the oxygen left my blood and my lungs began to burn for a breath that wouldn't come, a single, arrogant thought flickered through my dying brain like a fading spark. This isn't happening. I'm Caleb Ward. I'm too strong to die. Then the darkness claimed me. The silence of the deep is a lie. There is no such thing as quiet when your soul is being ripped from its cage. One moment I was drowning in the crushing weight of the Atlantic, and the next I was hovering in a space where gravity had no dominion. I looked down, and for the first time in my life, I saw myself from the outside. There I was, the unbreakable man, floating like a discarded piece of equipment. My body, once my pride and my temple, looked small and fragile against the vast, churning gray of the sea. It was a hollow shell, a suit of armor with no one inside to wear it. The arrogance I had carried into the water evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. I was no longer the one in command. I felt a sudden, irresistible pull, as if invisible hands had reached through the veil of reality to seize me. I wasn't just floating. I was being hauled upward through currents that weren't made of water, but of shimmering light and suffocating shadow. The transition was violent and rhythmic. As I ascended, the atmosphere began to vibrate with a sound that shook me to my core, a synchronized, thunderous thump-thump, thump-thump. It was the sound of 1 billion heartbeats, the collective pulse of humanity echoing in a realm where time seemed to bleed into eternity. But beneath the rhythm of the hearts, I heard something that chilled my blood more than the ocean ever could. Voices. I recognized them, the low, gravelly shouts of men I had served with, men I had buried, and thousands of others I didn't know but recognized by the cadence of their spirit. They were the voices of fallen soldiers, crying out from the deep. They weren't screaming in pain. They were mourning, a sound of profound, eternal regret that seemed to rise from the very foundations of the abyss. It was the sound of an army that had realized too late they were fighting the wrong war. Just as the weight of those voices threatened to pull me back down into the dark, the chaos fractured. A light, more intense than 1,000 flares, cut through the shadows. I shielded my eyes, but the light didn't just hit my face. It permeated my mind. A figure stepped out of the brilliance, standing upon the surface of the spiritual storm as if it were solid ground. He wasn't the soft, distant figure I'd seen in paintings. This was a commander. He wore robes that shimmered like refined steel, draped with a sash that looked like it had been dipped in the blood of kings. He raised a hand scarred by a different kind of combat, and the roaring voices of the fallen went silent. The warrior king looked directly into the wreckage of my soul, and his voice resonated in my bones. "Caleb," he said, and the storm obeyed him. In that moment, I realized I wasn't being rescued. I was being briefed. The scene shifted with the jarring speed of a tactical extraction. One moment I was in the quiet deep, the next, I was standing in a place that defied every law of physics. It wasn't a room with walls, but a vast, cosmic command center where the fabric of reality seemed peeled back. Below us, the earth was suspended like a glowing marble, but it was hemorrhaging light. The commander stood beside me, and as he gestured, the view zoomed in with terrifying precision, showing me the front lines of a war I had been too blind to see. I saw skies over major cities turn the color of bruised flesh and fire. Below, the very men I identified as brothers in arms were turning their weapons on one another. It wasn't just civil unrest, it was a madness, a coordinated betrayal fueled by something invisible. I saw shadowy, grotesque figures, creatures of pure malice, riding on the winds of human hatred. Jesus looked at the carnage, his face a mask of divine sorrow and righteous anger. "Caleb," he said, "you have spent your life studying the movements of men, but in 7 days they attack, not flesh against flesh, but spirit against spirit." He swept his hand across the horizon, and maps of the great nations appeared, glowing with geopolitical lines that began to dissolve and bleed into one another until the boundaries were gone. Everything we called security was melting into a singular, chaotic dark. I felt the old SEAL panic rising, but here I was powerless. "Give us more time," I pleaded. "We aren't ready. My men, the world, we need more than a week." Instead of answering, he turned me around. Behind us sat a vault that looked like a military armory. On the left side, The racks were overflowing with the gear I knew, rifles and plate carriers, all covered in a thick layer of rust. But on the right side, the armory of faith, the racks were nearly empty. My own locker was a void. "You trained your body to fight wars that end in graves," the commander said. "But you left your soul unarmed for the only war that lasts forever." The warrior king moved toward two massive arched gateways. With a wave of his hand, the first vault groaned open. A warmth hit my face that felt like a summer sunrise. Inside, I saw rows of armor that shimmered with a diamond-like brilliance. These were woven from the prayers of the faithful and the unwavering truth of those who stood for him when it cost them everything. This was the spiritual ammunition of those who knew the real fight was won on their knees. Then he turned to the second vault. As it opened, a wave of biting, unnatural cold washed over me. This room was dark, smelling of stagnant water and spent gunpowder. I saw my own reflection in the rusted steel. There stood my racks of specialized gear, the suppressors, the night vision, the metals I'd bled for. But here, they looked like garbage. The metal was pitted, the nylon webbing was rotting. Everything I relied on to make me feel unbreakable was nothing more than a collection of relics. The commander's voice cut through my pride. "You prepared for the enemy you could see, and you are defenseless against the one you cannot." The weight of my failure was a physical pressure. I looked at the 7-day countdown glowing in the sky above the maps. "You have 7 days," he said, his eyes burning with fire. 7 days to go back and sound the alarm. Tell them the time of debating is over. The time of preparing is now. I'm telling you this now because I've seen the empty racks. If you're still listening, don't scroll. Don't treat this like entertainment. Those who ignore this warning will remember this moment when the silence breaks. Subscribe now, because every soul that joins this mission counts as ammunition in heaven's army. We are building the final line of defense, and the count starts with you. Silence is surrender, and in 7 days, surrender won't be an option. The return was a car crash of the soul. I gasped awake with a raw, wet rattle as my lungs fought for the air they'd been denied for 12 minutes. The blue-white glare of hospital fluorescence burned my retinas like a flashbang. Doctors and nurses swarmed me, calling it a medical miracle. But as the haze cleared, I saw my teammates standing in the corner. To them, I was a survivor of a freak accident. They talked about oxygen deprivation when I tried to tell them about the 2 armories. I saw it in their eyes. They thought the unbreakable man had finally cracked. But the visions weren't fading like a dream. They were hardening into a tactical map. Every word and that terrifying 7-day deadline remained etched into my consciousness. I didn't have time to convince the skeptics. I pulled the 4 needles from my arms and grabbed my phone. My mission had shifted from the physical to the prophetic. I began recording, my voice still raspy from the intubation tube. I didn't speak in the soft tones of a preacher. I spoke with the cold discipline of a commanding officer. "Listen up," I told the lens. "This is spiritual triage. The attack begins in 7 days. Purge your greed like it's a virus in your calms. Forgive your enemies quickly, or that bitterness will be the breach the enemy uses to enter your perimeter. Armor your homes with faith, not just plywood. This isn't a drill. The countdown has started, and December is the month the silence ends." I posted the video and watched the numbers climb. I was a soldier again, but this time, I wasn't fighting for a flag. I was fighting for the clock. By the 6th day, sleep was no longer a refuge. Every time I closed my eyes, the visions hit me with the force of a breaching charge. I saw the skylines of great cities wreathed in a strange, flickering violet flame that seemed to consume the very hope of the people within them. I saw the Atlantic churning and frothing as if the floor of the ocean was melting. It looked like a boiling cauldron, and the sound of the steam rising was like the collective scream of 1,000 lost souls. On the news, the talking heads were desperate to maintain the all is well narrative. They pointed to the shifting colors of the atmosphere and called them natural disasters. I sat in front of my camera and roared back. Don't listen to the experts. The first strike is deception. They want you looking at the weather while the enemy is flanking your soul. This isn't nature turning on us. It's the veil tearing open. The digital world was a battlefield. My videos were a viral contagion of truth and terror. In the comments, the divide was absolute. There were the scoffers who called me a broken hero and mocked my fantasies. But beneath the noise, there was a growing movement of the desperate. I saw thousands of messages from people who were finally dropping to their knees in living rooms and office cubicles. I could feel the time slipping away, a sensation like sand pouring through the chamber of a jammed rifle. The sky outside my window took on a deep, bruised crimson hue. The 7 days were almost up. Tomorrow, the silence would end. The air in the room felt as though it were being vacuumed out. My chest was stuttering, a rhythmic, jagged warning that my temporary commission was coming to its end. Outside the hospital window, the world had turned a terrifying shade of scarlet. I fumbled with the tripod and hit the live button one last time. This is the final briefing, I whispered. The clock is at the red line. Stock up, not your shelters, but your souls. The attack begins at midnight, and it's not coming for your borders. It's coming for the spirit inside your ribs. I leaned closer to the camera, the heat in my chest becoming a searing fire. If you believe me, don't just watch, join. Hit subscribe and become a soldier in this fight. And if you don't believe me, write in the comments why, because silence is surrender. The digital clock on my monitor flipped to 11:59. A low roll of thunder shook the hospital walls. I reached out to say one more thing, but the rhythm of my heart simply stopped. In 7 days, I managed to breathe as I looked into the light. They attack. My body hit the floor, and the screen dissolved into static. They found his body the next morning. His camera was still streaming, but the feed had frozen on his final frame, a faint smile and eyes fixed upward. The attack he warned about wasn't what we expected. It didn't start with sirens. It started with a whisper in the conscience, a sudden, heavy realization of every lie we'd ever told. The invasion wasn't on our soil. It had begun in our hearts.